Participation is highly recommended in this. Highly recommended in this. It's very academic work. I'm gonna have to read this book multiple times. Very good book, though. Don't fall asleep on us, Doodly. Just kidding. Hope Doodly's phone's not broken. Usually when that happens, they're like, "Oh, I lost my battery."
My battery's at 41% right now. We should be good.
You should be good. Are you close to an outlet just in case?
Yeah, I'm holding my phone.
Sweet. Just making sure. We can start, I guess. Jesus, I didn't realize how quick this would begin. My fault. I thought I had another like 3 minutes. I usually have another 3 minutes, but not this case. All right, chapter 3. Attica is revolutionary consciousness and abolition of world making. Now, I think they got the tomes and everything. I think they moved them all to Attica now. That's what I'm understanding. So we'll find out. All right, here we go. Recovered by the state investigators from the detritus of the... Is that detritus? I'm going to find out. We're going to find out since we're so close to it. No, it won't let me do it. I have to do $5 an hour. I have to pay $5 for it to sound it out. I'll be right back. All right, it's detritus. Hopefully they let me took pictures of it. I took pictures of it. Let's find out. All right, here we go. Detritus. Detritus refers to a waste, debris, or small fragments left behind after an event, destructive or decomposition. So it's just essence of things left behind, it seems like, in another word. Okay, let's go on it. Detritus. Recovered by the state investigators from the detritus of the Attica Rebellion. An errant sheet of notebook paper outlines 3 categories of political actors. Pragmatists, quote, ask for practical institutional reform without challenging the very foundations of the established order. Existentialists, sorry, my bad. Dang, hair. Existentialists, quote, no longer believe in institutionalized reform, but rebel culturally rather than politically. And finally, come to revolutionary protesters, i.e., the militant minority, which believes that the American society is so corrupted by its military-industrial governing class and its imperialist foreign policies that only a revolutionary upheaval could bring meaningful change. Penned by an unknown hand, the document NVCs? Oh my gosh, why do I use words that I don't know?
Invences.
I'm gonna find out.
Evences.
It's like events, but events. It's events. What's up? It's events. Which means, hold on. It didn't even do, hold on a second. All right, I might have it now. Who knows? Let's find out. If I can remember. It didn't do it again. Jesus Christ, why is it not doing it?
I said no.
We don't want you to do this. All right, there it is. Okay. Events. To display, reveal, or make evident a quality, emotion, or trait, typically through clear outward evidence. That's what that word means. Okay. Evidences of the diverse political currents circulating among the rebels. Currents representing multiple genealogies and epistemologies of ontologies of struggle. This invitation to engage with the Attica rebellion's political multiplicity destabilizes its over-representation as merely a critique of brutality, a rational negotiation between the state and its subject, and a demand for prison reform. Blood in the Water, the Attica Uprising and the Legacy. Heather Ann Thompson's History of Attica is emblematic of this prevailing approach. Thompson's account de-radicalizes the prison movement by relying heavily on state sources and by interpreting those sources through the carceral epistemology that foregrounds questions of recognition, rights, humane treatment, government transparency, legal redress, and reform, all of which stabilizes rather than challenge the foundations of the established order. She writes that in the lead up to the rebellion, quote, not only had the prisoners been developing a critique of poor prison conditions, but they also had begun to discuss how they might reform their institution, what they might do concretely to get the state to treat them as human beings who were serving their time, not as monsters deserving of abuse and neglect. While this is certainly true, the aforementioned schema of protest establishes that the understanding, discussions, and aspirations of many within Attica exceeded this pragmatic concern. Nonetheless, across nearly 700 pages of text and footnotes, Thompson never once evokes the powerful abolitionist tendencies that flourished among the rebels. When Thompson mentions, quotes, oh my gosh, revolutionaries, she does so almost exclusively in quoting statements by prison commissioners Russell G. Oswald, New York Governor Nelson A. Rockefeller, and other white antagonists of the rebellion. And doing so, Thompson analyzes state sources on their own terms without extending the same respect to black radical sources that the state could neither legitimate nor control. The result, as I have argued elsewhere, is the erasure of Attica's abolitionist legacy and the silencing of the revolutionary theories, visions, subjectivities, and desires that it generated. Our collective understanding of Attica and Black rebellion more broadly is further impeded by the apparent need of analysts to pander to white audiences that devalue, criminalize, and assail complex and protracted Black insurgency while craving explosive spectacles of Black suffering and death. The rebellion was savagely crushed when the state assaulted forces shot 39 people to death, rebels and hostages, and wounded/tortured countless others. Across the various journalistic, cinematic, and scholarly narration of Attica, we have been led to believe that what is most important about the event is its repression, the way in which the state deployed when attempted to conceal overwhelmingly violence against it. While I offer an extended exegesis and theorization of the massacre in the following chapter, I agree with the Institute of the Black World, IBW, who just days after the massacre wrote that, quote, "It is much easier for us to grasp the despicable treachery of the state officials of New York than it is to digest the meaning of Attica. I would go further and suggest that the application of official malfeasance. I'm gonna look up that word, everybody. Yeah, malfeasance. Yeah. It's malfeasance, and it means, hopefully, if it lets me do it, please let me do it. Oh my gosh, I didn't do it. Malfeasance is an intentional wrongful or unlawful act by an official or employee that causes harm, often involving abuse and power, corruption and fraud. It is a deliberate, dishonest action, distinct of negligence. So it's not good. It's bad. Bad. All right, back to the thing. Oh my gosh, if I can get this to work. There we go. Malfeasance and trickery are not only easier to convey, but more comforting because they hold out the responsibility of redress, whereas the revolutionary, abolitionist, and anti-colonial content of the rebellion, which I endeavor to elaborate here, constitutes a terrifying antagonism with the known world. Understanding an anti-prison struggle as revolutionary struggle were shaped by conceptions of the prison as a microcosms of broader world order. For Attica's captives, like John, I'm going to try to say his word, Deka Juwahi Hill, and the dehumanization of prisoned people was unique in intensity, but not in form. The Atticas of the world were distillations of colonialism's living legacy. In those who operated them, Deka Jawishya saw the same anger, distrustful and deathly brings the perpetrated genocide and enslavement against indigenous and black people across the globe. The primary differences between Attica and the average, they used the G word to signify underdeveloped communities. Deka Jawihi wrote in an unpublished open letter was that in Attica, quote, the people who control your life were free to racistly harass, attack, and murder you, and the public would never hear a sound. Deka Jawiha and others abhorred prison, the dreadful food, the medical neglect, the brutal working conditions, and the intensity of racism and brutality it inflicted upon them. Addressing these minimum demands at the onset of a rebellion, the rebels submitted the 15 practical proposals, calling for, among other reforms, higher wages, political freedom, religious freedom, an end to censorship, parole reform, better food, educational programs, and improved medical care. However, Deka Jua was uninterested in pleading for what he called antidotes for the population's suffering. Rather, he and others desire a remedy for that which causes the disease in the first place. In his own words, this was, quote, the complete abolition of prison and the revolutionary overthrow of the system that needs them capitalism. This chapter adopts Deka Jawiya's conceptualization of abolition and revolution as overlapping yet distinct ruptures from the incarceral world. At the same time, it is indebted to James and Gracie Lee Boggs' useful differentiation between revolution and rebellion, drawing on their experiences in the Detroit Rebellion of 1967. The Boggsies argued that rebellion tends to be reactive, localized, negative, and fixated on arresting antidotes from outside entities. A rebellion, quote, disrupts the social disrupts this society, but it does not provide what is necessary to establish a new social order. By contrast, hold on a second, there's who's in here. You can bring Khadija up. By contrast, they conceptualize revolution as a positive social political project, a collective process that draws on the internal resources of the people engaged in revolutionary struggle, propelling humanity towards the radically new future while enhancing its capacity for creativity, consciousness, cooperations, and moral evolution. The Long Attica Revolt was revolutionary, not only because people like Deka Jawahai, can't say his name, and other members
It's
of
like
the
Deka Jawaya. It's supposed to sound like Deka Jawaya.
Okay, can you mind putting that name in the comments so people can see what it says? If you don't mind. And other members of the military minority understood themselves as such, but also because communal internationalists and autonomous practices that emerged presaged a new social order, a new ethics, a new form of human sociality. This perspective corrects misleading state-centered approaches that predominate the historiography of carceral rebellion and instead centers a revolution, abolitionist, black, speculative, futurity. I can look up that word. Right back, everybody. It's futurity. Okay. Although it lasted only 4 days and was largely confined to a small patch of sand and gravel enclosed by the concrete wall, we must not allow the event's geographically and temporarily limited scale to detract from its significance as an epical act of abolitionist world-making. The Attica Rebellion elaborated revolutionary and abolitionist poetics that were profoundly creative. When the captives rebelled, they ruptured an actual site, a racial colonial domination, and sowed the seeds of something entirely new. In doing so, they embodied, rehearsed, and struggled through the constellation of radical and revolutionary tactics, dynamics, and contradictions. They developed ethical practices of solidarity, interdependency, place-based struggle, self-actualization, internal nationalism, care, and militant defiance, including experimentations with underground infrastructures of guerrilla warfare, capacitation? I don't know that word. You can look up this word. Show you what it says, hopefully. What's up with these stickers not coming through? So that's the word. The final psychological maturation process. Minimalini. Oh my gosh, so many different words. It's undergoing within the female productive okay.
Mammalian. Mammals.
Thank you. Come on. Pushing the button. This prefigurative implication of their praxis were apprehended by the IBW, who called Attica the revolution that was / the revolution that is to be, and by the Prisoner Solidarity Committee, who wrote, quote, Under these bizarre conditions, the Attica rebels projected into that arena a glimpse of what is possible: class solidarity and an overthrowing of racism and ingenuity and initiatives of the masses, their iron self-discipline and their humanness, even to the lowest of their tormentors. Many on both sides of the struggle believe that if the dispossessed could organize themselves, seize power, and radically transform social relations in Attica, one of the most repressive sites of the United States, then revolution on the much larger scale was possible. This chapter constitutes the most ambiguous. Is that right? Ambitious efforts to date to elaborate Attica's abolitionist and revolutionary content. For this reason, it largely forgoes retreading the well-worn negotiations between the rebels and the state around what Martin Sosostri termed the Attica reform demands. Instead, it amplifies the political and intellectual labor of the abolitionists, revolutionaries, and the gangsters who developed a political culture that was inimical for reformism. Less than a month before the prison eruption, Samuel Melville, a key figure in the rebellion, wrote a letter where he opined in his unique writing style that captives in Attica needed to, quote, avoid the obvious classification of prison reform. He continued, when you come right down to it, of course, there is only one revolutionary change as far as T prison systems in America is concerned. But until T Day comes, when enough of our brothers and sisters realize that one revolutionary change is, we must always be certain our demands will exceed what the pigs are able to grant. Achieving an abolitionist future, the obvious alternative to prison reform depended not on forcing the state to concede to pragmatic demands, which the captives should have already enjoyed as nominal U.S. citizens, but on the legitimating their movements, nurturing the consciousness of communities in struggle, and helping them recognize that those in power were unwilling and unable to necessitate their political aspirations. The rebellion's development reflect anarchistic practices inherited in Black resistance. Upon seizing the prison, disproving the widespread belief that Attica was, quote, riot-proof, the rebels organized themselves into what George Jackson called the Black Commune. Thinking the Black radical and revolutionary formation across time and space, pre-colonial African communities, oh my gosh, another word. So many words. Right back. Oh, why does TikTok give me such a hard time in getting these definitions out? See, it never brings it up. Oh my God, so weird. Okay, that's the word. Okay. Come on. Here we go. The act of process of enslaved people in America's freeing themselves while fleeing plantations to form independent, often hidden communities in remote areas. Okay. Come on. Very slow today. Okay, cool. All right. On the era of chattel slavery, the semi-liberated zones, quote unquote, of Guinea-Bissau and Mozambique, and the survival pending revolutionary programs of the BPP, Jackson's theorized the Black Commune as an autonomous site of self-organization capable of nurturing revolutionary culture and alternative modes of collective life. The bleeding edge of the rebellion was not a demand for inclusion and recognition, but for escape, resurgence, and autonomy. It was an internal demand for complete divestment from the norms of white culture, liberal capitalist ideology, property relations, and respectability. Angela Davis compared Attica to the Paris Commune, which emerged exactly a century earlier than what Marx wrote in the 19th century. Paris was equally true of Attica. Quote, the great social measures of the Commune was its own working existence. In what follows, I offer a never-before-told account of the rebellion's eruption and the escalation into a form of carceral guerrilla warfare from the perspectives of the captives who participated in it, and then narrate the shift from spontaneity to organizations, showing how the rebels transformed their negotiation of a carceral regime into a communal space, reordering the prison's social geography and establishing a new political order. Next, I elaborate what I call the, quote, Attica Underground. I show how the rebels fostered a clandestine culture of militant self-defense, strategic retaliation, and war-fighting capacity with formal and informal links to the Black Liberation Army and the Weather Underground and other underground formations. When I turn to the aesthetic, inmate, and erotic experiences of social life in the commune, invoking Sylvia Wynter's notion of genres of human beings. Is that right? Genres?
Yes, you're correct.
Sweet. I demonstrate that beneath the hard out layer of the war, the inner core of the rebellion was constituted by radically new forms of human sociality and care. Finally, I close with implicating the rebellion's transnational dimensions. Huh?
Not implicating, explicating.
Okay, the rebellion's transnational dimensions, theorizing the commune as itself a demand for a new world, one that was not addressed to the state, but to revolutionary and progressive forces in the solidarity with the rebellion. Hold on a second, I gotta let a kitty cat in. Total disorder. Total disorder. Next section. Everybody okay? Hey, Two-Spirit.
Yep.
All right, everybody okay? No one has to say anything before I move on? All right.
Okay.
We're good to go. We're good to go. Yep. All right, total disorder. After 5 decades of calculated obscurities and former captives who I'll call bugs, quote unquote, offered a narrative that significantly reshaped our understanding of Attica. A streetwise Harlem native imprisoned for selling dope, Bugs witnessed the spark that ignited the prairie fire. That's what Mal talks about. Anybody understand that? A spark can ignite a prairie fire. He then fanned the flames, helping to set the inferno ablaze. On the morning of September 9th, 1971, Bugs had a rare opportunity to travel from Attica C Block, where he lived and worked, to A Block. Escorted through C Tunnel by 2 guards, he reached Times Square, the point at which the prison's 4 major quadrants intersect. In a typical day, the consul officer stationed within Times Square would have spoken to Bugs' escort or inspected his pass. But this day would soon prove the antithesis of typical. The consul officer, William Quinn, was distracted by a confrontation brewing on the other side of a tunnel gate, where Bugs had been planning to go. Peering through Times Square, Bugs saw a very large black man facing off with a much smaller white guard. Behind them, a ragged line of men in gray jumpsuits were looking on. He recognized them as, quote, 5 Company, end quote, otherwise known as the Idol Company, quote unquote, were the most disruptive and oppositional of Attic's captives were thrown together. These combatants, as Bugs calls them, were, quote, the guys who were ready to mix it up with the police at the drop of a hat. A day earlier, some of them had been involved in a melee during which a guard and a captain were struck, and 2 captives had been badly beaten. Rumors had circulated since the previous night that the men had been killed, causing an insurrectionary fantasy, and whispers of retaliation to emanate from the captives' quarters. When Bugs stepped closer so that he was now almost touching the sea gate, he discerned the identity of the combatant. It was Idol Company's unofficial leader, the infamous Tommy Kilimanjaro Hicks. Hicks is somewhat of a mystical figure for those knowledgeable about New York prison during this era. A brief write-up in the Underground press claims that he hated all symbols of state authority due to no small measures of a confrontation in which a beat cop shot his 2 front teeth out through his face. Depending on who you ask, a picture will emerge of a genius, a brute, a menace, a killer, or a revolutionary. Hicks was one of the BPB/BLA veteran Saku Odiga's first political mentor. Odiga, a legend is his own right, describes Hicks as a, quote, George Jackson-like figure, end quote. An autodidact. What? Gotta look up this word. An autodidact. A polyglot, scholar, and a pugilist of the highest order. What? That's a lot of words. All right, let's start with one word. Autodidact. Jesus. Autodidact. A person who is self-taught, having acquired knowledge or skill in a subject, craft, or discipline through their own studies and initiative rather than through formal education. Let's look at the next word. Be right back. Next word is polyglot. All right, let's look at what this word says. Effects. Polyglot. Of course I didn't. Polyglot is an individual who speaks, reads, or writes multiple languages. All right, scholar. We know what a scholar is, and a pugilist. So we're gonna look up that word.
Looks like pugilist.
Maybe pugilist?
Maybe pugilist? That sounds like it might be it.
Pugilist. It's pugilist. You're right. Oh my gosh. So many hard words. One of these days I'll know words better if I keep doing this. Of the highest order. Apparently, he was known for provoking prison guards into attacking him just so he could knock them out. 2 or 3 at a time. Legend has it that Hicks inspired such fear and anxiety among them that one warden instituted a rule forbidding his subordinates to open the gate to Hicks' cell unless accompanied by an administrator. Hicks inflicted major damage during the Comstock prison riots in 1963, in which black people banded together to violently retaliate against white captives and guards who had long colluded in subjecting them to the Jim Crow style apartheid regime. After joining the Panthers in prison, Hicks became one of the original 13 ringleaders of the Auburn Rebellion. On the 5th and final day of the Attica Rebellion, when the state assaulted force embarked upon their killing spree, several survivors witnessed Hicks charge a state trooper, strike him in the face, and attempted to take his weapon. The story goes that Hicks was seized upon by several agents through a ditch and filled with bullets. Retribution not only for what he had done in Attica, but for his long biography of rebellion. Though aware of Hicks' outsizing reputation, nothing could have prepared Bugs for what happened next. In an instant, Hicks unleashed a brutal punch to the guard's face and followed it with a roundhouse kick to his body. Bugs saw the guard collapse, then watched others from Idle Company along with men from 9 Company who were lined up further down the corridor run into a fray. They mercilessly attack the other guards, unveiling themselves of their billy clubs, handcuffs, and keys. Sacagawea, who was among the rioter starters, claimed that Samuel Melville, a white revolutionary affiliated with the Weather Underground, was there as well. Sacagawea, who was a Native American ancestry, wrote in his autobiography, quote, "A black, white, and the color they use for indigenous people, men, are unified with one instinctive impulse to defiantly engage the brutal regime." Sacagawea's conceptualization of the rebellion's initiation as defiant engagement with a brutal regime configures liberal discourses of violence, resistance, and even self-defense that permeate most his historical accounts of black insurgency. The word engaged was overlapping connotations: to expose oneself to risk, to entangle, entrap, or interlock with, to enter, or to bind or pledge, as with marriage. Already ensnared at the fulcrum of brutal regime, these captives, who formerly occupied distinct rungs of the racial colonial order, willingly hurled themselves deeper into the incarceral war zone, exposing themselves to a greater suffering in order to momentarily redistribute the violence. Upon beating the guards into submissions, rebels from both companies turned their attention to A Gate, the only barrier preventing their insurgency from spreading to the rest of the prison. As they struck the gate with their bodies, clubs, and an industrial mop ringer made of solid steel, Bugs could hear Officer Quinn, confident that the Times Square gate that shielded him would remain unyielding, hurling racial epithets and threatening the rebels with just redistribution. Then it happened. The counter retribution. And then it happened. The contingent development that could not have been foreseen nor planned for, Bug still remembers the loud pop that echoed through Sea Tunnel when the bolt holding a gate in place gave out. The flood of enraged beings instantaneously poured into Times Square. At that moment, Quinn represented the Empire, the state, the police. He represented Attica itself. He represented all the humiliation and pain that oppressed people had endured for centuries. Quote, the melee that followed was one of the most incredible displays of unbridled hatred, even unleashed against the enemies of humanity, wrote Sacagawea. Quote, it could only be compared to nuclear explosion. The group seized upon Quinn, subjecting him to repeated blows that crushed his skull. He died 2 days later, and the only prison guard to be killed by prisoners during the Long Attica Revolt. When the gate fell, Bugs turned and saw that one of his escorts had fled in the opposite direction. The other stood petrified, mouth agape, showing a mixture of terror, curiosity, and disbelief in his face. Without thinking, Bugs snatched his baton and gave him a firm slap across the face. He had done this just 60 seconds earlier. Bug would have paid a severe price, but in that time conditions had changed drastically. At that moment, with no backup in sight and nothing standing between him and the onslaught, the guards fell to his knees and began to sob. The fragility of the guard and the gate symbolized the fragility of the empire and exposes the public transcript of its impermeability. Is that right? I'm gonna look it up.
Impermeability, it looks like, but I don't 100%
It's
know.
hard,
I don't
I
know
know.
what it sounds like.
Yeah, it's hard. Now it's not letting me do anything. It's so annoying. It won't let me hear the word. Like the format has changed on my phone. It's annoying me.
I think it's impermeability.
Impermeability, a physical property, the physical property or state of a material that prevents fluids such as liquids and gases from passing through it. Okay.
Yeah, impermeability.
Thank you. Impermeability. Jesus. Okay, impermeability as mythology. Attica was not riot-proof. It is, as its architects claim, its gates could be broken, and its guards were neither gods nor masters. They were mere men who bled, cried, and died like any other. This was the proof, and had become standard operating procedures across the protracted revolt. The rebels tore through the prison, causing mass destruction and multiplying their ranks by opening everything that was locked. They charged into Attica's various corridors, offices, halls, shops, and vented their fury against the infrastructure of their captivity. They shattered everything made of glass, ripped the telephones out of the walls, destroyed the plumbing system and the radiators, damaged the ceiling, the cell locking, and electrical systems. They used a forklift to break down the door to the metal shop and other gates separating various areas of the prison. They broke into the armory and seized 2 gas guns, which they used to launch gas grenades down the corridor into offices where guards were hiding. They used these weapons to physically attack the captured guards, many of whom They stripped naked and marched down the corridors under threat of death. The Manichaean reversal of the humiliated ritual that they had been subjected to so many times before. The government's report found that 32 prison employees sustained injuries ranging from bruises, cuts, and tear gas burns to several lacerations requiring numerous stitches, concussions, and broken bones. Enveloped in the chaos, Bugs felt a visceral urge to join in the destruction, to attack, rend, and disabled Attica's built environment. But ripping pipes out of the wall, breaking windows, and smashing metal surfaces with sticks had been done in the past rebellions seems inadequate for what the situation called for. Quote, they were causing destruction, but it wasn't my kind of destruction, he recalled. Quote, I wanted to blow the joint up. Bugs expressed desire conjures Fanon, who wrote that in the opening stages of an anti-colonial war, quote, to blow the colonial world to smithereens is henceforth a clear image within the grasp of imaginations of every colonized subject. Seizing this opportune moment to materialize his abolitionist imagination, Bug drew on his existing knowledge of the terrain, organized a small crew of rebels to carry out an audacious act of carceral guerrilla warfare. He knew that the welding shop contained several canisters of gas and that there was a stove in the clerk's off room above the prison chapel. Admin, the pandemonium of the rebellion, he and his crew appropriated 3 industrial shields, loaded them each with roughly 20 canisters of gas, and wheeled them down the hall towards the chapel. When they created a human daisy chain, transporting the canisters up the stairs leading to the chapel. As others saw what was happening, they joined in. Each man took a canister and handed it to the next man, all the way up to the top, and stacked them in that room. It was filled with old hymnals and Bibles, what I call the Pyromaniacs Pyromaniac dreams, laughing. And we stacked all that stuff in there, and we had kerosene from the paint shop. We just doused the room with flammable liquids and went down where they had a ship's mast, head of Jesus Christ, made of ebony wood. The thing was massive. We doused it, and we trailed that kerosene out, broke the gas line, and when we got downstairs, we lit the kerosene, and it raced back up the stairs to the room. And when the fire got going, we ran back out into the yard and waited. About maybe 20 minutes later, the explosion rocked the prison. I mean, I think it blew the steeple off the damn building. Bug's detailed account reveals how the spontaneity and chaos of collective rebellion created an opportunity for forethought, plotting, cooperation, and self-organization. Wondering about his targeting of a religious institution that figured so predominantly in colonial conquest, I asked Bugs why he blew up the chapel. He responded that the church had no significance whatsoever, that he targeted it simply because it was there. When I asked him why he sought to cause so much damage, why he wanted to blow the joint up, he said, because I was a New York State prisoner and I was full of rage. So when I got a chance to show what I thought, that's what I thought to do. And here's my first violation. Number 1 violation.
Yeah, they're trying to get your face.
Let's see, I'm trying to figure out which one. There, let's just do that one. All right, if you can all like the live, share it out more, that'd be great. Empowered by the context Bugs was able to honestly convey the depths of his anti-incarceral animus. This criminalized praxis existed in tension with much of contemporary abolitionist discourse, which seems to actively avoid dealing with destructive engagements of this sort. A notable exception can be found in the scholarship of Sarah Haley, who offered a concept of sabotage for thinking about calculated, agentic, targeted acts, such as the leveling of Atticus Chapel. Haley writes that although sabotage mobilizes the will to break the transform rather than to tweak, it is not reducible to the destructive act, nor is it solely about attaining a rational notion of victory over oppression. Quote, instead, it is about the practice of life, living disruption, rupture, and imagined features. It is about the development of epistemologies of justice and collectivity, contestation. Now they want me to know that I'm, contestation. Sorry, I just lost. Contestation of the binaries produced through Western judicial doctrine and the individualizing ethos of criminal punishment enacts against infrastructures that deform, constrain, and incarcerated life. A new theory of living is inherent in the act of sabotage. It disables the existing regime and enables the emergency of new forms of being that had previously been impossible. By the time the chapel exploded, Bugs had made his way to D Yard, where the rebels had gathered their hostages and begun to congregate. He remembers the eerie silence that befell the assemble as they watched thick plumes of black smoke pour from the roof. Atticus' siren was now blaring, meaning that the walls that surrounded them would soon be surrounded by armed agents of the state. Bugs recalls this as a threshold, a moment where the rebels realized that a line had been irrevocably crossed. None of them knew where their rebellion was headed, but it was clear that they could not turn back. So they had to go all the way through it. Can't stop at just, because like they talk about, if you're going to do an insurrection, you have to go all the way through it. So building a black commune. Although Roger Chapin was more of a pragmatist than a revolutionary, his intervention at a critical point in the rebellion helped set it on a revolutionary trajectory. Prison from armed robbery, Champ, as he was called, was well respected through the population. He was an army vet who had done tours in Korea, in the Philippines, and Japan. A skilled quarterback on the football field, an exceptional legal scholar who had helped dozens of men overturn their case and win their release from prison. Chapin had left his cell only after the chaotic opening moments of the rebellion subsided. As he made his way through D Yard, he beheld a mass of uncaged people with no purpose, direction, or objective. Most were just milling about, but others were fighting, having sex. Some men were reportedly raped, endeavoring the available food, vandalizing the prison walls, and getting elevated on seized shrugs. Belligerent wanted to do further harm to hostages, but were prevented from doing so by the NOI, fearing racial revenge for their history of collision with the guards. Several white captives have formed their own clique and were preparing to defend themselves from attack. Overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation, Chapin sat for several moments in silence, contemplation. On the one hand, he knew that if left to remain on his current trajectory, D-Yard would implode and the prison would be swiftly retaken before the captives could accomplish something more. On the other hand, he had only a few years left on his sentence and knew that if he got involved, his chance of being paroled anytime soon would be dashed. Ultimately, deciding that the collective good was more important than his individual desires, Chapin grabbed a bullhorn, stood on the picnic table, and addressed the assembly. Although his exact words have been lost to history, witnesses recall him demanding discipline, organization, and unity. He told those in D-Yard that, quote, the walls surrounding us all, end quote, that it was time to, quote, eliminate fights among ourselves and focus on our hostilities outside. A participant later testified that after Chapin's internal demand, no one had to be directed or told what to do. That, quote, everyone just fell into position. The hostages were moved to the center of the yard and encircled by a ring of NOI guards. Multiple lunch tables were pulled together to serve as the site of official political discourse. Above this, a wooden canopy and lights were erected. The rebels rigged a public address system to allow to address the rationed food and am I? Where did I stop at? Did you hear commune director?
You're breaking up.
You're
back at the rebels rig. No, you were breaking up real bad. You're still breaking up real bad.
I don't know where It'd be nice if Dooley was here.
I can't hear you either. Like, I barely heard do.
Okay.
And I assume you say doodly.
I didn't hear you say doodly. You're breaking up too bad. You were breaking up too bad.
Jesus Christ. How about now? Am I breaking up now?
No, you're back.
Am I breaking up now? Okay.
No.
Jesus Christ. All right. The rebels rigged a public address system to allow the speakers to address the commune directly. They rationed food and water and prepared meals such that between September 10th and 12th, 3 meals a day were provided for more than 1,200 people. They demarcated a medical area with a sheet and a white cross. They were dispensed prescriptions and offered basic care to the rebels, as well as the hostages. They dug a latrine and established cleanup details to remove waste. When it got dark, they brought their sheets and blankets into the yard and set up tents and lean cots along the periphery of the prison inner walls. They named the passageway beyond their control and barred gates separating a tunnel, a site of the rebellion's eruption from town square, the Demilitarized Zone, DMZ. As the rebels demarcated a new spaces from being in common, they constructed what Ruth Wilson Glamour called a abolition geography. The organized disorder of the rebellion's opening moments had weakened the prison's material integrity. Now they exerted kinetic energy and intellectual labor to remap their world literally, quote, changing places, end quote, without even leaving the walls. Archived video surveillance footage of occupied D-Yard offers a glimpse of the collective labor they poured into the commune. As the camera's frame pans across the densely populated yard, the voice of a state trooper can be heard over the pervasive sound of hammers driving nails into wood. With the sense of utter bewilderment, he says, quote, "They seem to be building as much as they are destroying, carved out from within spheres of racial colonial domination. The commune became a zone of epistemological antagonism with the state and an infrastructure of collective self-creation, comprised of embodied consciousness and collective physical, intellectuals, and emotional labor. The captives developed this infrastructure not only to meet their immediate needs, but as a model for the political forms that would be needed in the future. As such, they became what Joy James called architects of abolition, creating a historical blueprint for the abolitionist world that future generations can study and learn from. Sacagawea's maternal ancestors belonged to the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, based otherwise known as, do you all know the French word Confederacy, and were indigenous to the land upon which Attica was built. He experienced the commune emergencies as a creation of a decolonized space-time, refracting the indigenous concept of the medicine wheel through black, and they used a color for indigenous people, power rhetorics. Sacagawea wrote, on December 9th through the 13th, 1971, a new nation was born, a time when all four walks of the earth came together to make a change for social and human dignity at any cost, even if it meant our lives. D-Yard became an exuberant space of disalienation, liberation, and oneness, an example of what solidarity and revolutionary struggles could produce. The rebels established a new political order within D-Yard's abolition geography. Elections were held in which representatives from each cell block were chosen to serve on the committee of spokesmen. This is awesome, their insistence on calling themselves, quote, spokesmen rather than leaders resonates with Fanon's assertion that contrary to Western bourgeoisie ideology, ordinary people in struggle are capable of governing themselves. For Fanon, the political party must serve as a vigorous spokesperson and a incorruptible defender of the masses. Otherwise, anti-colonial movements will be vulnerable to neo-colonial retrenchment. Among the spokesmen were Roger Chapin, Hubert X. Biden, I don't want to say Biden, Blyden, who, I said that, Blyden, the second time, who had served on the negotiating committee during the Toombs rebellions, Richard X. Clark, a prominent member of the NOI, and L.D. Barkley, an orator of enormous power, to preserve the integrity of their new order. They also established a security force. Frank Big Black Smith, a well-known football player and a coach, was voted as chief over the course of the rebellion's 4 days. As many as 300 rebels participated in security. They patrolled the yard, the catwalks, the tunnels, the cell blocks, ensuring the safety of the rebels, the hostages, and the outside observers who were later sent to aid the negotiation with the state. But by the way, thank you, Joe. Thank you. During subsequent investigations of the rebellion, the New York State Special Commission of Attica and other government entities exhibited an abiding interest of the commune's decision-making structure and security imperatives. It is in its final report, the commission concluded that the commune relied heavily on coercion, that it lacked effective democratic decision-making processes, and that the majority of those in the yard feared violence if they voiced unpopular opinions. Echoing the counterinsurgent analysis of incarceral rebellion promulgated by the FBI and others, the commission argued that most of the rebels were forcibly, quote, herded into D Yard and could only leave if granted a pass. The very same pass that prison authorities had used when they were in control. The report quotes a local white surgeon who was allowed into the yard to check on the health of the hostage and who later called the commune a dictatorship. According to Dr. Warden Hansen, the security force was an implement for a small group of militant leadership who deployed their group to lord it over the voiceless and the powerless masses. In many respects, the commission concluded the inmates' society in D Yard was arranged in the same way that the authorities against whom they were rebelling ran Attica. So they lied. The state characterization of the rebellion as a dictatorial regime contrasts sharply with the recollection of many who were intimately familiar with its inner dynamics. Spokesmen were selected based on their respect within the population and appointed through the consensual process. According to Chapin, time restraints often forced the spokesman to make unilateral decisions. However, he maintained that he and others were elected because the masses trust him to make these decisions, and that they always informed the commune of such decisions after the fact. Moreover, when faced with major decisions such as those involved the content of their written demands, the spokesmen communicated the issues to the commune and opened the floor for debate. In these instances, anyone who wanted to have a voice in the decision-making process needed only to approach the negotiating table, ask for the microphone, and address the yard. This included those who did not speak English, as young Lord and Auburn ringleaders Dalu Gonzalez, I think, remained on hand to perform Spanish translation. When debates arose, decisions were reached by simple majority, as indicated by the volumes of applause issued in favor of a given course of action. Multiply outside observers would later refer to D Yard not as a dictatorship, but as a true democracy. The document, an document written to the surviving Attica brothers. I think we're done with our 10-minute shit. Attica brothers in 1973. Jomo Amawel took exception to the media portrayal of the Attica spokesman and the security forces as the cohesive apparatus, and the rendering of the commune's majority as zombies and fools who only move when they're told, who can't think for their own selves. Of course they would do that. At the time, over 60 of them, including Jomo, were facing charges for the role of the rebellion and the core function of the trial, as Jomo saw it, was a criminalized black resistance to portray the rebels as warmongers and to demonstrate that an autonomous social order established by black convicts and revolutionaries could not possibly be more just as or egalitarian than capitalist democracy. He argued that this had to do with the authoritarianism and the violence inherent in Western democracy. It is difficult for people who are familiar with a dictatorship form of government to expect the fact that a group of a couple of hundred people could decide things or move on things in a collective and democratic manner. He argues that the security was not an instrument of coercion, but rather a means of preserving the integrity of the commune and the well-being of others of its members. And I think that's right. Security was mainly responsible for food, medical care, clothing, what have you, to keep people from getting ripped off sexually or keep the water supply, to see that everyone have mattresses, blankets at night, mainly that everybody stay together and recognize one another as brothers under the same roof, same condition, being able to look above the 1 to 1,000 of an inch difference, such as skin, not to get hung up on racial things and not let it grow into a racial riot. This is one of the main things we try to prevent. Through security, the commune protected itself from regressing back towards the culture of exploitation, racism, and autonomization that defined the normalized carceral regime. However, the D-Yard commune was not a utopian zone, free of contradictions, conflicts, or coercion. When I asked the Attica survivors if it was true that otherwise unwilling captives were herded into D-Yard and prevented from leaving, he said, let me put it to you like this. Everybody wasn't down. Others represented the counterinsurging element from within. In 1972, Thomas Hughes published an acerbic essay. I'm going to find out what that word means. Everybody, right back.
That sounds like a good idea, because I don't know that word.
Acerbic. It's acerbic. Let's see if it's going to let me. Acerbic. Yep.
Cool. What does that mean?
We're about to find out.
They're getting that.
A tone committed or person that is sharply critical, sarcastic, and biting in nature. That's what that means. Acerbic essay.
So sarcastic tone.
In the thank you. Essay in Conservative National Review under the pseudonym of Frederick Wiggins. He argued that the rebellion was orchestrated by a small band of communist, anti-white fanatics who, quote, did not speak for the more rational elements of the inmate population. Of course not. On September 10th, a small group of white captives was ordered to dig the commune's latrine as punishment for flying a white flag above their tent, an apparent signal to the state that we were on the side of the enemy. Later that day, two white men, Barry Schwartz and Kenneth Hess, and I guess we're going to do some shitty shit, were observed giving an unauthorized interview to a reporter who had been allowed into the courtyard. A tribunal was held in which a pair were found guilty of treason and incarcerated in what the rebels called the People's Prison. Michael Pervetera, can't say his name, who was also white, had been suffering from a mental episode so severe that he was unable to remember who he was or control his motor functions, was also incarcerated in this prison within a prison. 3 days later, when the state investigators were picking through the ruins of the commune, the bodies of Schwartz, Hess, and Pervetera were recovered from the yard. One or more of the rebels had stabbed them multiple times and slashed their throats. In Minecraft, the incarceration and execution of these men by the rebels complicates Attica's abolitionist legacy and exposes a tension within abolitionist genealogies. Prison abolition tends to be framed as an ethical practice in which reliance on violence and incarceral techniques is disregarded in service of building a, quote, world without prisons. What then are we to do with the fact that the Attica rebels erected a prison within what I have already called an abolition geography, and similarly executed 3 men for violating an unspoken code of conduct and being difficult to manage? It is important to note that while several of the rebellion's revolutionaries identified as abolitionists, others did not. Dalun Gonzala, a developing world Marxist, once said, I don't advocate abolition abolishing prisons. What are we going to do with the Rockefellers and the Nixons and shit? Dallou's provocation compels the reauthorization of abolitionist ethics under battlefield conditions. His claim that prisons are necessary stemmed to not from his investment in the state's monopoly over legitimate violence, nor in a moral validity of the prison in the abstract sense, but from his tactical calculation that in order for a besieged population to endure in the face of determined opposition, liabilities and antagonists would need to be incapacitated and neutralized. After all, taking the guards hostage and imprisoning them had been the revolt's conditions of possibility enabling the delimited freedom that had brought them to this point. Attica was an incomplete abolition, not only because it occurred on a temporarily and geographically limited scale, but also because it necessitates other forms of captivity. Still, Attica represented something worth fighting for, and fight they did, in visible and invisible ways. The Attica Underground. Okay, we got 45 minutes. Joe.
Yes.
Remember 106, but if you can, find me a good stopping point that I would probably have to stop in around 15 minutes.
I can't really do that till we get way closer.
Okay, sounds good. You're just better at it than I am. I'm looking to see when the next stopping point is. Which is far, far away. Way far away. Like 14 pages up. All right, where was I at? What page was I on again?
You're on page 106.
All right. Thank you. 106. The Attica Underground. In the untitled essay in Babylon, an underground newspaper launched by the Algiers-based international section of the BPP, two key figures of New York radical prison movement argued that in the United States there exists an undeclared state of war. On one side, where the poor and the dispossessed masses struggle to eke out the existence across the globe. On the other, where the super rich, their corporate empires, and their racist reactionary state machinery. However, a large fraction of the populace, especially those who the author calls black reform integrationists and white liberals, were confused about the nature of their struggle and the methods needed to win. This confusion was dangerous since the people were running out of time. What was needed was for the progressive political forces to accept the terms of war and transcend all constraint, all restrictions imposed upon us by the enemy. Written in December of 1971, in the Brooklyn House of Detention, this call to arms was co-authored by Deruba bin Wahad, a leader in the New York chapter of the BPP and a keen architect of the Black Liberation Army, and Hubert X. Bladen of Toombs and Attica Rebellion. Its authorship and analysis are indicative of the underexplored relationship between the Long Attica Revolt, the BLA, and the Black Underground more broadly. This relationship has remained largely unknown for multiple reasons. First, underground formations are inherently secretive. Second, many of Attica's revolutionaries have passed away, often violently, either during the September 13th massacre or years after the rebellion, sometimes under questionable circumstances. Third, analysis of slavery and prison had tended to produce narratives of black supplication and suffering over those of a A genetic?
Agentic.
You don't know, do you? I'm gonna look it up.
It's pronounced agentic.
I want the Google phone to go back to like how it was so I can hear the dang words.
It's agentic.
Okay. Thank you. Let me go to the effects. Of course it didn't do it, like always. All right, agentic. The capacity of a system or individuals to act independently, proactively, and with purpose to achieve specific goals. Nice. And militant rebellion. Fourth evidence of black militancy gets pruned from historical narratives out of fear that its appearance could be used as a pretext for greater repression. By contrast, my conception of a long pretext for a long Attica revolt treats the axiom, quote, repression breeds resistance, as paradigmatic.
Dynamic.
Paradigmatic is digmatic. Yeah.
I read it wrong.
The underground is no worries. The underground is a geographical metaphor for the conditions of militants, refusal, and exteriority
Yes.
of respectability, visibility, and governability, and upward mobility under racial capitalism and colonial war. This condition traverses political, culture, and economic and spatial domains of what is that word? Furtive, often illegal confrontation with the state. When framed through the practical concerns of revolutionary warfare and the underground is a clandestine infrastructure for carrying out political military action. These actions include financial expropriation, prison breaks, transportation of fugitives, the armed offensive against state infrastructure and personnel. The basic premise is that a liberation movement cannot succeed if it does not have an apparatus for engaging in criminalized activities, ideally those that leave no definite links to the above ground forms of organization it is designed to support. The BLA was not a discrete organization, but rather an umbrella term for various decentralized units. Zaid Malik Shakur defined it as a solid subterranean apparatus existing here in the United States, an alleged conglomeration of many armed groups that based their credentials on action. In her opening statement during the trial for the killing of a New Jersey state trooper, Assata Shakur, perhaps the best known member of the BLA, describes its origins and nature. The idea of the Black Liberation Army emerged from the conditions of black communities, conditions of poverty, indecent housing, massive unemployment, poor medical care, and inferior education. The idea came about because black people were not free or equal to this in this country, because 90% of men and women in this country's prisons are black and third and developing world peoples, because 10-year-old children are shot down in our streets, because dope has saturated our communities, preying on the disillusionment and infrastructures of our children. And the accept of the BLA arose because of the political, social.
It's frustration of our children and concept.
Thank you.
Of the BLA.
Thank you. The concept of the BLA arose because the political, social, and economic oppression of black people in this country, and there is oppression. There will be resistance. The BLA is part of the resistance movement. the Black Liberation Army stands for freedom and justice for all people. The fact that the grievances of the BLA around issues of conditions, poverty, housing, unemployment, medical care, education, freedom, equality, oppression, and state violence are virtually identical to the formal demands issued from the Jail Rebellion, the Auburn Rebellion. The Attica disrupts the dominant narrative that Attica was about reforming, quote, poor prison conditions, and instead focus on attention on the generalized conditions of anti-Black G-side under globalized empire. More than receptacles for the criminalized poor, prisons were crucibles through which the BLA, as a historical specific articulation of Black underground, was forged in blood and bones, following the Panther 21 frame-up, Kawasa, Belagoon, Darumbian, Bin Wada, and others. New York Panthers were forced underground, organizing themselves into autonomous BLA cells. At the same time, the radicalized effects of racist state violence combined with militant political education to create a situation in which, according to Assata Shaker, Black revolutionaries were, quote, being manufactured in droves in the developing streets. They used the GH word, places like Attica, San Quentin, Bedford Hills, Leavenworth, and Sing Sing. Kareem C. Alia joined the BLA in Auburn, and estimates that 30 other men followed the same path, including Woody Chayinga Green, Anthony Kuma, White Henry, Shasha, James Brown, Cato Dunn James, Joe, I'm not saying that, Daniels, Mourinho, Dalu Gonzali, Jomo Saku, Omowell. There were also folks like Blyden, Aki, Al-Jadi, and many others who never officially joined, if such a thing can be said about underground organization, but were politicized by the BLA ideology, and who DOCS would label BLA associates. BLA action carried out beyond prison walls often made their connection to Attica explicit. For example, 3 months after the massacre, the BLA unit called itself, quote, the Attica Brigade, claiming responsibility for the grenade attack in the NYPD patrol car. Although Black Panthers begins monitoring the BLA as early as October of 1968, the public became aware of its existence in the spring of 1971, when it claimed responsibility for unaliving 2 New York City patrolmen and wounding 2 more. At roughly the same moment, captives began establishing their own underground formation within Attica's wall. The so-called, quote, Central Revolutionary Format, also known as a Tactical Intelligence and Combat Unit, aimed to build a infrastructure of political radicalization, communication, and military capacity that linked the militant factions in Attica various political constituencies through the pyramid structure. At the top stood the chief tactician, the organization sole commander responsible for the arranging and the movement of troops, and the orderly planning of maneuvers. In the middle were tactical mission planners responsible for exchanging information, enforcing discipline, and ensuring the coordination of maneuvers. Finally, there were a network of cells composed of not more than 4 brother comrades who had undergone a program of political, economic, and social culture indoctrination, as well as the study of the military-industrial complex, the guerrilla warfare, Mao Zedong's Little Red Book, Malachi Bakunin's Revolutionary Catechism, and the writings of Frantz Fanon, George Jackson's were required reading. The extent of which this plan for the underground formation was actually realized prior to the Attica Rebellion, the identity of its participants, and its impact during the revolt all remain an open question, but the incubation of this clandestine political military apparatus alongside and the dialogue with the BLA significantly reshaped how we think about Attica, revealing it to be an expression of Black underground and the articulation of a global decolonial abolitionist revolutionary counter-war.
Okay.
Of course,
That's it.
not all the rebels.
That's
What?
it. Stop.
What, you think we should stop there?
Yep, that's your stopping point.
All right.
I went ahead and found it for you and have it highlighted in the book so that when you got here, I'd stop you.
I can't highlight in this book. It won't let me highlight.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know why. Yeah, you should be. Just kidding.
I
Where's that
know.
kind of
Oh
pen?
my fault. Lynn, page 109.
So, pages 109. Okay, and it starts off by saying, of course.
109, Lynn.
Last paragraph. Okay. All right, so I have that written down now. All right, open for anything. Who would you like to go first? Either Doodley or Joe. Which one want to go first? Okay, let me do this real quick. I muted so you can go.
Oh, sorry. So, I really enjoyed the book. I like learning about it. And of course, you would expect the state to say really bad things as compared to what actually happened on the inside. Though I don't like the idea of the one person having the mental problems and they were killed too. I didn't like that. I mean, disabled people always end up being, but other than that, I that's what I noticed and enjoyed.
Open for you, Doodley.
Yeah, I agree with Joe. And something that I really like about this book that doesn't seem to be really common in the other books that we've read that are political, at least to this level of politics, is the mentioning of the contribution of different philosophies and standings. And it talked about how the existentialists contributed and how the abolitionists contributed, and how there was contradictions had. And when it comes to this level of politics, that it seems to be rare to find.
I like how they call it the Black communes, because those are a thing and I like how they kind of compared it to a modern day Paris Commune, in a sense, to give the descriptions of those in contrast and compare. I like the fact that they went from a spontaneity to an organization. They did the thing that Frantz Fanon talks about, that it needs to become from a spontaneity to an organized revolution that seeks the liberation process and the destruction in a new type of world. So I like that. I like how they bring Frantz Fanon into it and other things like that. I like the fact that they talk about how the guerrillas are not completely the people that they brought up to protect were not solely armed guards but actually to provide for their people, food, water, and all those things. You would think that that's the thing, that's what's going to happen, So I like that point too, and it does give you a bit of a format of how it's going to look like for us. We're going to have, maybe it starts off completely chaotic and then moves into a direction of organization, a direction of revolutionary not potential, but direction of organization, mobilization, and militancy, you know? So it's really showing that too. So I like that too. Anybody else? Anything else to add to anybody?
No, not really. Unless you wanted me to repeat.
All right. Well, that's good. All right. Does anybody from the comment section have anything to ask? I can give it a few minutes. There's not that many people here, anyways. All right. Weird that I wasn't able to. Weird I'm on LTE and you guys are not seeing any kind of like me, like, you know, what do you call it? Lagging or anything. Breaking up. It's weird.
Yep, you're doing fine. So.
All right then.
Doing fine
all right.
now.
Well, all right. Well, if no one else has anything else to say, we'll go ahead and close it, and we'll continue it tomorrow at 6:30 Central Time. All right.
Sounds good.
All right.
All right.
Well,
See you
take care.
all around.